fantastic, Teresa Steele-Schober. Now, Teresa, you mentioned that there were other hats. Would you like to introduce yourself with some of those other hats on your head as well?
Sure, thanks, Sarah. So I am the managing director of a specialist environmental sustainability consulting service. And so we do a lot of work with a range of mining companies around the world to help them embed ESG practices into their businesses. And this conversation around responsible raw materials in the context of the energy transition is certainly something that in our business is very much at the forefront. We've been doing some very interesting work with people at the moment. One project that we've been doing for a battery minerals company required us to do, we did a whole lot of benchmarking as part of that process. And what became very apparent is, and this is the link to the reporting space, is that many of these battery minerals companies, first of all, when you go onto their websites, they all talk about how unique they are and their value proposition is so unique. But by the time you get to company number 97 with the same unique selling point, you realize that there's not that much unique about it. But they seem to have this common perception for many of them that just supplying critical minerals is all the green credentials that they need. So we are providing graphite, or we're providing lithium, and we're working in the battery space. So therefore, invest in us because we're a green company. And a number of them have very little further behind that. You do a bit of digging and you find that there is no supporting ESG strategy. There is not even a policy. It's just, oh, we're so great because we're selling into this market. And so when you draw the link between that and the work of Crisco and the reporting entities, you need those two to be working in parallel, because you need these companies to be forced to disclose what they are or aren't doing so that investors can actually make an informed decision. If they are, because the suite of your environmental and social impacts is much broader than decarbonization. And of course, climate change is critically important, but what about biodiversity? What about water stewardship? All of that full spectrum of ESG, what about community resettlements? It all needs to be transparently presented and reported. And all of these reporting frameworks ultimately want organizations to improve their performance, because everybody is going to get demerits if they report on bad things that they've been doing. So it's all pushing people in the right direction to ultimately improve performance. But by having mandatory disclosures, investors can then make a decision as to where's the meat behind these claims that are being made.
And so with this, Teresa, I mean, so a lot of these organizations are perhaps, early stage exploration companies. And I don't know about you, but I've spoken to quite a few of them where they tell me, oh, but we're too early for ESG. What goes through your mind when you hear that?
The exploration geologists are the make or break of a project, because they're the guys who they end up sitting in a bar after a hectic day out in the field, managing drill rigs. They end up having a conversation with local communities. And in that conversation, there's something like, oh, this is going to be the biggest mine ever. We're all going to be super rich. And, they start making all these claims. And next minute, that's the community's expectation. And so if those team of people get it wrong, it becomes increasingly difficult for mining companies later, even if they're doing good things. It becomes increasingly difficult for them to get the objective credit for that, because there's a perception in people's minds, and once people have that perception, you can't change it. And if they don't manage a small oil spill related to a drill rig properly, how are they going to get the community to believe that they're going to manage a mine responsibly? And the second side to that is mines need to know and understand the sensitivities of the environment in which they're working. And the best time is to do that is way before the mine is in existence. Build up as much data as you can, understand the baseline conditions, because things do change. We hear colloquial conversations. Oh, when I was a child, it didn't rain this much in March or whatever. You know, you need to start building up that track record and getting in with the exploration guys. That gives you an opportunity that you can't buy back later on.
So with that, the incorporation of ESG in a truly meaningful manner into things like your JORC compliant resource reserve statement that you push out there, because that's effectively an exploration company is not selling a mine, not selling rock. They're actually selling data and an interpretation of that data, which I guess is then summarized in your JORC compliant piece of paper that you're doing. What kind of impact will truly incorporating ESG into those reporting codes and everything, for example, that Tom was talking about, how is that going to help?
I think one of the consequences of that is perhaps a consequence that is not palatable to many in the mining industry, because by doing that upfront disclosure, by incorporating that into the valuation part, so when you start declaring a mineral reserve, you might find that actually it's not viable to mine that deposit. Yeah. And those are more of the conversations that we should be having. I go back to the conversation that you had much earlier this morning, is should there be a cap on minerals that are being mined? And it's a country by country decision, and each country in a way is going to act the same as an individual company, because they want the best for the people in the country and they want to take advantage of it. But at what point do we have a global conversation to say that, well, we actually only need this much cobalt for the demand, and how do we then allocate that fairly? It's so much easier said than done. But in a company, within what you can control, you need to have these processes that are robust. Investors need to hold the companies to account, because often what happens is the companies that invest in doing the most work in this space get penalized, because if you present a detailed report that's 200 pages long, that's got a lot of information, there's always a lot to pick apart. Whereas if it's a 10-page document, there's less for you to get your fingers into. So don't penalize those companies, but reward them for saying that actually we're not going to mine this area because of these sensitivities, because of these potential impacts. This is how we're changing it. Perhaps we've excluded these resources because it's too close to a sensitive area, or actually we're not going to resettle this community, or we're going to change the way we do things. So it's that thinking process that mining companies need to adopt, and reporting frameworks is one of those tools to force those conversations to happen across multiple stakeholders.
So with this, Teresa, I'm not sure if you saw Andy Reynolds' presentation on late Monday afternoon, where he talked about changing the business model with regards to mining. And some of that was talking about, well, rather than just looking to dig the rock out of the ground, we're actually development companies, because perhaps one of the problems we've got is if you go out there and you're looking for, say, the cobalt or whatever, and you find some, but there's a real, there's a river that might be contaminated, there's a local population that are going to be disrupted, etc. that's there, actually you're still rewarded to actually find the rock in the ground, rather than perhaps looking at those ESG context or those aspects. If we change that model to say, actually we're more development companies, where actually you're looking for wealth in order to fund that improvement with regards to wealth in that area. Now, this sounds really radical and really arm wavy, etc., but it's just coming back to that, the crux of the problem, in that when we truly include ESG into those calculations, the total size of those assets that are available to mine in a responsible manner will probably go down, and so people will probably lose money at the moment. So I don't know what you think to that, and the sort of total shift of the business model.
If you read the World Economic Forum stakeholder capitalism work, that's very much the thinking. It's all about long-term value creation, and that long-term value creation is holistic. It's looking at all elements of value creation, which means that you shouldn't be doing value destruction. So by polluting rivers, that's destroying natural capital. So it's taking this holistic approach, and that works really, trying to get companies to operate in that space. we have a global market that at the moment isn't supporting that, because you get rewarded for making as much money as possible. And investors are fickle. They want as much return on investment. You know, when you put your money into a company, you want to get as much back as quick as you can. So there's a huge shift globally that needs to happen to support all of this. But yes, the reality might be that there are fewer minerals than we think we have. And we shouldn't be mining some of those. We need the framework to govern that and enforce it to happen, because individual companies at the moment, although some of them are doing amazing work, they're battling these forces as well internally, because they've got shareholders, some of whom just want money. They've got shareholders who want them to act responsibly. And how do you bridge that gap? So it's really a wicked problem. It's not easy to solve.
Yes, and there are so many different tensions, etc., within all of this as well. So we need the world, or kind of the financial system, to change, to move towards more of that donut economics rather than where perhaps we're at the moment. We need exactly. So we need all of these bits and pieces. We need the chemists to come and help, because they're the ones that can actually work out how to process some of these materials in a way that doesn't have so much threat to the environment. So we need everybody to come to the table. Now, Teresa, you mentioned that sort of conflict, or that tension that's in there. And I know that you've seen one of the really nasty, horrible questions that we've been asking to others. So my sincere apologies for what I'm about to do. That's never a good way to start it, is it? I'm not really sorry. So in a hypothetical world, okay, where we continue to need cobalt for things like batteries, and we haven't managed to invent a different type of technology whereby we wouldn't need the volumes of cobalt, for example, that we're projecting to need at the moment. And in that hypothetical world, okay, that is not real, where the only places that we can get this cobalt from is either deep sea mining or from a 9-year-old, and that's all the information I'm going to give to you. Do you buy that cobalt from deep sea mining or from the 9-year-old?
I'm going to give a quick answer and then explain the rationality.
Okay.
I would go for the 9-year-old, because if I am an investor or I'm a purchaser, it's probably quite easy for me to find out that someone is doing deep sea mining, because they're going to tell you where they're operating. And it's very quickly discernible from that they're mining in the deep sea. It's comparatively quite easy for someone to hide that their cobalt is coming from a 9-year-old, because they just say, we are mining this cobalt in this country. If you don't know the context around the prevalence of child labor in that country, you may say, oh, well, it's on land versus deep sea mining, so I'm going to go with this company and buy their cobalt. This is where the value of the reporting frameworks come in, and the disclosures, because if you know that a company has acknowledged the fact that they're buying from 9-year-olds, well, that's at the moment, that's already a point in their favor, because they're being transparent about it. But I would want to know what they're doing about it, and I would try and influence the way that is happening and try and change that. So yeah, I would buy from the 9-year-old, because there's a potential to change it, and because the company, if they're disclosing that there is child labor, that's the kind of company that I want to work with, because they've recognized that there's a problem, and we need to resolve it.
Brilliant. Thank you for that, Teresa. So I think this is fascinating. And I can see Jill and Tom going, oh my goodness, you're not about to ask us, are you? Don't worry, I'm not about to do that to you guys, unless you want to, of course. And also, just to make it really clear, you know, by asking this question, we are absolutely not condoning child labor. But what we're trying to do is to explore some of these really difficult questions, which are real at the moment. And I think it's fascinating. So yesterday, when we posed this question, Andy Whitmore said, oh, but that's just the argument that the deep sea miners give, where they say, well, you can either buy it from us or you have to buy it from the 9-year-old. But interestingly, almost every person that we have asked so far says, on balance, I don't want to do it, but I'll buy it from the 9-year-old, and this is why. So I think it's absolutely fascinating just seeing the thought process as people work through this really difficult conundrum. And well done, Teresa, as well, for bringing in the reporting to your answer as well. So with that, Teresa, do you have any final words of wisdom to share with us before we move on to our next speaker?
No, just really to say thanks for the conversation. I always enjoy being part of these forums and hearing everyone's views. It's not an easy solution, and you know, there's many forums at the moment talking about the role of mining in the just energy transition, and it's critically important. So yeah, thanks for being part of or initiating further conversations in that area.
Fantastic. Thank you very, very much, Teresa.